2019, there's something that you want to do, some way you want to feel. And rather than setting like a New Year's resolution, you want to just like face what you're avoiding. Just face it. It doesn't have to be like conquering it, doesn't have to be defeating it, just facing it, embracing it, learning from it.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, Savannah family. Happy New Year. Oh, I love this time of year. There is so much rich energy. Everyone is getting on their mat and meditating. This is such a potent first week of the year, and I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am and making it to your mat. We have an awesome episode today all about how to face what you're avoiding in 2019. So really appropriate for this first potent week of January. If you have not signed up and aren't doing the free chakra challenge that Savannah and I are hosting right now, I want to make sure you sign up because you can start today. This is 20 minutes a day, 14 days in a row. This series focuses on the lower four chakras and their elements as a way to balance your energy, fuel your intentions for 2019, and practice self-care. So we have fire classes. Those are designed to motivate you and kickstart your energy. Everything is 20 minutes. We have water classes. Of course, this is all about the second chakra. You gain clarity and inspiration in these. We move intuitively. And then, of course, we have our root chakra classes. You distress and combat anxiety. These classes are really focused on grounding your energy and connecting with Mother Earth. And then we have our heart chakra classes, expanding your capacity for breath and air. And these are designed to help you really connect with your deepest intentions. I don't want you to miss this special 14-day series. It's happening right now, very beginning of the year. So go to brettlarkin.com/elemental and you'll get all the classes from me and Savannah Spirit. It's totally free. All right, now introducing our guest today. Dave Ursillo has published 7 books spanning spiritual poetry, nonfiction, and memoir. He's published over 500 articles, which is so amazing, and 6 more books. He's also in the Chicken Soup for the Soul series, and he's worked on projects with Seth Godin and Danielle Laporte. His work as a traveling teacher of writing, creative self-expression, storytelling, and yoga has led him to work with over 4,000 students from over 30 countries. And today we're talking about avoidance. How can you break through and face what you're avoiding in 2019? And why is focusing on avoidance in particular so valuable? Dave is going to tell us. He's going to share with us a journaling prompt that he thinks can really transform our lives this year. And I want you to listen to this whole episode because Dave and I take a little bit of time to warm up. I kind of want you to get to know him, know his background. But by the second half of this episode, guys, we're talking about shame, fear, uncertainty. We get really raw, and he gives so many incredible tips of how you can bust through, break through, face your fears, tackle what you're avoiding in 2019. Let's dive into this interview. Dave, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Brett. It's a pleasure to talk with you, and thanks to you who's listening wherever you are, at home, commuting, getting ready for your next yoga class. Thank you for tuning in.
Yeah, so I was really excited to talk to you because we have a mutual shared passion for journaling. I'm looking at my journal right now where I wrote all my affirmations this morning, and I love connecting with other yogis and I know you're also a writer and you've published so many books. So I'm kind of curious, before we dive in deeper, tell the listeners a little bit about how you combine yoga, writing, journaling. How did that connection initially get made for you?
It's such a good question, Brett. Thank you. And because oftentimes when I'm in the yoga room, I am either carrying my journal to my mat, like right beside my mat, and I leave it there. And sometimes I'll just start journaling in the middle of a class that I'm practicing in. Hopefully, it's not too rude, but I think every teacher I've ever had at the front of the room has completely understood like how some sudden insight or inspiration can be sparked in the course of your yoga, of your moving meditation practice. And so I like to try to just capture a note right there. And that kind of translated over the years into me actually trying to teach fellow yoga practitioners the power, the importance of bringing a physical space like the journal to their yoga practice, because it's really important as we have these moments of self-awareness, these bursts of inspiration, like sudden clarity. Brett, I'm sure you've had it too. Less likely when you're actually in the act of teaching and cultivating an experience for a room, but as a student, somebody says something that really catches your attention, or you have this sudden momentary insight or awareness about some burden that you've been carrying, or something that you're healing through, or just a thought, an idea. It's like inspiration, divine inspiration finds you and strikes you like lightning, and you're just like, oh, like you have this momentary clarity. And it's really important to make physical space present for otherwise intangible ideas and momentary desires. As creatives, I believe we are all creative at our core as human beings, as spiritual creatures. And it's really important to cultivate physical space where the ideas in this realm of like the intangible and the esoteric, like ideas and dreams and beliefs, are all operating on this invisible plane, and we kind of act as these natural conduits to pull them down out of out of source and make room for them, like make them feel present, make them feel welcome, make them feel at home in the physical world. It's like pulling seeds out of the sky and planting them in the earth. And that's what I really believe a journal grants us the power to do. It's not just about writing a to-do list or keeping track of personal diary, just like reflecting on your day, which is fine. I do that as well. But I think at its spiritual core, the connection between writing and between yoga is that they are each unto themselves practices of self-knowledge that are cultivated, tilled, and harmonized through self-expression, whether that's the quiet self-expression of a yoga practice, a physical self-expression, or writing some words, some ideas, some affirmations like you, Brett, on the page. That's the symmetry, that's the overlap. And I think on that deeper level, that creating a welcoming essence for the ideas that find us is like a really powerful relationship to have to inspiration itself.
I like what you're saying, because I think a lot of times folks find journaling or writing intimidating, or they're self-conscious. What you're saying, if I can paraphrase, is I think what you're getting at is that if the yoga practice is connecting us with this, our highest vibration, our highest intentions, our highest dreams, we experience that on the mat, right? But if we don't write it down, it's like those dreams, those intentions, those big lofty goals, they don't exist in physical space is the issue, right? Like once we leave the mat, we forget. And if you write it down, in some ways it's hard because you maybe interrupt a moment where you're feeling very peaceful and having this amazing insight. Like I have this a lot on my mat. I don't know if you've had it too, or listeners can relate, but it's like, you're like, oh my gosh, this is such an amazing insight. And I'm like, okay, do I want to stop and write this down? Or do I want to just, either stay in meditation or stay in my stretch or stay in my flow or whatever. But the thing is, if we never write those things down, they don't have this tangibility, right? While if they're written and they're on paper and we can see them, it's like they become more real just for the pure fact that we've written them.
Exactly. And you're exactly right, Brett, that like you certainly don't want to like unconsciously use like a journal as a crutch for getting out of an experience, or being like too quick to, I'm not encouraging people to be like journalists of their experience and like document everything, because that would kind of detract from the magic.
It's like, now I did Warrior 2 with my foot in the wrong position. Yeah, like that's not what we're talking about.
What about my ex during Warrior 2?
Yeah.
Still not happy about how that ended. Like things like that. Like you don't need to do that. But yeah, I think what you're saying is, so the beautiful part about having a practice like yoga that is so, it's a physical moving based meditation, right? So it's for me, when I first got to the mat, when I first went to yoga, I started to make all these these connections, I should say, between yoga and writing, because I was a writer seeking out yoga, which is actually an interesting story. I had just, this was in 2011, I had just self-published my first book, and I had these like huge lofty expectations that it would like magically become a bestseller, because I'm an idealist and I apparently don't have a problem dreaming really big, when I haven't earned writing a bestseller by any measure. And in the wake of that, natural disappointment, which was that I did not write a bestseller, I was kind of left grasping for like how to make my career as a writer work. And so I finally sought out the yoga room, which really intimidated me at the time because I'd only been practicing a little bit of yoga, mostly online. And when I first went into the yoga room, like I said, I started to make these connections, and I saw the space of the mat, that shape we're all so familiar with, as being a lot like the space of a blank page of a journal, and saying, every time I show up to my mat, this is my act of self-expression. Whatever I create here, not with ink, but with the motions of my body, and with my breath, and with my energy, and with my intentions, is really, telling a story. It's having an experience. It is a mirror. I think that the blank page of a journal is a mirror at its core. It shows us who we are in the moment and what we're experiencing. And I think yoga does the exact same thing. So if you're able to either use some like breath and movement as with yoga to inspire creative self-expression, I think that's awesome. I teach that and I encourage that. And vice versa, if you're on the yoga mat and you feel these sparks of divine inspiration finding you, this is kind of philosophy of Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Big Magic. She has this belief that like inspiration or source energy kind of like chooses you. And if you miss the moment, then the idea will eventually move on to somebody else, right? So it's kind of like a way of just giving yourself the opportunity, more tools at your disposal to live a more holistically creative life by capturing little insights and inspiration and moments that inspire you and keep you feeling connected. I think that's what it's really all about, is bringing you back to the essence that is feeling connection, or the true definition of yoga.
I think, this is a time of year when so many people are making resolutions and trying to make changes and getting recommitted to their yoga practice and potentially a journaling or writing practice as well. Curious, like listeners, how many of you have made a resolution around something that you've been avoiding in the past? And you're like, well, this year it's going to happen. Like this year I'm going to do it, because I know that happens a lot, right? Like sometimes I noticed in years past, I don't work so much with resolutions anymore, but in years past, I noticed that my resolutions were literally like the exact same each year because I had failed or not done them the year before. So I know you have some interesting teachings and personal experience about avoidance, and that you were, as a writer and a struggling and emerging writer many, many years ago, you were kind of avoiding yoga, and it led you to have some insights about what advice you have for folks who have been avoiding something like year after year, and how to finally make a breakthrough, hopefully this year.
Absolutely. I love that, Brett. So here's what I want to try to download for you who's listening. It is, in so many words, how to finally break through on what you're avoiding in 2019. And it's really important to focus in on avoidance, because I'm a master of avoidance. Like that's like how I grew up. I avoided so much throughout my childhood, teenage years, young adult years, all the way to today. Of whatever I've been avoiding the most has always been the key in the locked door that like blew open a whole new chapter of my life, and like a whole new, I would say, like even like a reincarnation unto myself. Like we all go through these experiences, right? Of feeling reborn, of feeling completely like changed. And every time I've finally discovered what I was avoiding and then made steps to work through it, I found that like on a very deep soul level, something shifted forever. And the best way that I can describe this in a very short story is, I just mentioned a few moments ago, Brett, that I had been avoiding going to yoga. And as I first started getting into yoga, it was really like, I don't even know what the excuse was at the time. It was just kind of like, well, is this really for me? Am I a yoga guy? Like, is this me? And it was actually on a Thanksgiving day about 7 years ago that I walked into. It was my third ever yoga class. I walked into the room, And it was so crowded that I just turned around and I walked out. And I told myself as I was walking out the door, that was like, that's crazy. It's like, it's way too crowded and it wouldn't be comfortable. But I think on some level, I was avoiding doing really basic things that made me really embarrassed and at a deep level, really ashamed. And those basic things were things that would be really easy for some of your listeners, and or some things that may be really uncomfortable for some of your listeners. If I'm speaking to you, I definitely get it. Things like just asking someone to make room for you. Things like just like trying to get some help, and that all gets down to this core of like feeling worthy and deserving of being helped or even being seen, being received. You know, I kind of was operating for the first 26, 27 years of my life with this really strange essence of shame that made me feel like I didn't deserve anything that I had been given in the past, anything that I was trying to earn now. And so here I am, Brett, like looking at a full room full of yoga students, and it's my third ever class, and I'm like, you know what, this makes me uncomfortable, and I didn't even want to ask for help. So I turned around and I left. And I'd like to think that someday I would have gone back to yoga, but who knows? If I was so ashamed of being seen and being helped, who knows if I ever would have gone back? So the what happens on this day is that the yoga teacher who was teaching that Thanksgiving Day class saw me. She saw me leaving, and she didn't just see me leaving, but she followed me out of the classroom. She followed me out of the studio and onto the street where I was walking back to my car. And she had remembered my name. So she called me out by name. She said, Dave, we'll make room for you. Come back. And I insisted. I was like, no, trying to be polite. No, it's okay. Like, it's too crowded. And she just wouldn't have it. She was like, come back. And so I surrendered. I surrendered to her insistence, which was her seeing me and her wanting to help me. And I actually get a little emotional thinking about that, because as the rest would go on, that teacher would go on to become one of my teachers as I became a yoga teacher. And she became a great friend and an incredible mentor. And I would go on to teach yoga for 4-5 years. And, the yoga gave me community. It gave me incredible friendships. And it also taught me how to be in front of a room and to start to overcome what I was avoiding, which I didn't know was there, which was this essence of shame that I was afraid of being seen, of being witnessed, of being received, and kind of feeling like I didn't deserve anything. I didn't deserve to be listened to. And just to like put a bow on this story, Brett, I want to drive home the irony of the story, which is that, at this very time, when I walked into that class on Thanksgiving, even though at my core, clearly based on my behavior, based on what I did, I was afraid of being seen and received by people or feeling like I deserved to have a voice. The ironic part was, what was I doing in my life at the time? I just published my first book, and I was hoping beyond hope that it would be a hit and that I could go on a speaking tour after. So on the one hand, I was avoiding in my everyday life the thing that I was also seeking in the other side of my career. I didn't realize how much I was avoiding being seen or how uncomfortable it made me. But some part of my soul kept drawing me into like writing a book and like trying to teach and trying to be in front of people. So it's no wonder why my first book wasn't like a smashing success. I didn't do all the essential things. I didn't get help. I didn't share it with anyone early to see how their reaction was to it. I didn't even get the help of an editor, because I felt so exposed, so vulnerable and ashamed of, maybe this book isn't very good. So I kind of put blinders on and just put it out into the world. So all of that to say, thanks to circumstances, thanks to, moments like my Thanksgiving Day story or Thanksgiving Day experience, those 7 years ago, we have this incredible opportunity in the course of our everyday lives to learn from what we're avoiding. And what I recommend people do is to simply ask themselves to meditate on the question, to journal about it, and to kind of like think about these words. What have I been avoiding lately? It's a 6-word question, and it's one that can really change the trajectory of your life, not in like a very like, sometimes that must sound a little bit too radical. What I mean is that it can change the course of your life, because when you start to ask yourself, what have I been avoiding lately? All of the multitudes of options, all of the freedom that we have to choose this direction, that direction, what project do I pick, what book idea do I pursue? If you're in like a dating pool, like who do I commit to? We're constantly surrounded and inundated by this overwhelming number of choices and ideas and distractions. in modern life. When you ask yourself, what have I been avoiding lately? It's really not a masochistic mantra to force yourself into discomfort all the time. But the answer is that if there's something that you have been avoiding and you feel it in your heart, in your gut, in your bones, that there's something on the other side of your avoidance that could be really, really special. A lot of personal growth, a watershed moment, especially if it's around like overcoming some trauma, some discomfort, something you've outgrown in the past, something that feels stale that you want to shed and let go. When you turn into whatever you're avoiding, when you process through that discomfort, and without fail, I guarantee you, you will emerge on the other side of it. Like you'll get there. You'll get there. And
Yeah, no, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. I was just saying it's the processing through the discomfort that I think is so hard for folks. And I mean, I love this story that you shared, first of all, because I think we've all had that experience of like going into a yoga room and there not being enough space and it being awkward. And like, I don't know, I loved how you described that. And I'm so glad the teacher came after you. And because I'm sure we have so many yoga teachers who listen to this podcast, and I run a lot of yoga teacher trainings, and I'm like, I feel like I need to put this in the manual, right? It's like, yoga teachers, if you're listening, make space for people. If the class is packed, I mean, you as the teacher should be the one who's asking people to move their mat and asking people to rearrange. And another trick that I'll just share that I used to do, because I used to teach really packed classes, is actually go to the reception and ask like, hey, how many people are still coming? Because the people like go to the bathroom, and I'd like try to get an idea from her, like, are there 5 more, are there 10 more? And then I'd tell the whole group, hey team, we have at least 10 more, that we need to make space for, or whatever. And make it like a team effort, because and especially like I resonated what you were saying with like feeling shame or feeling not worthy, and literally just shutting down. And in the example of that story, the shutting down literally meant leaving the space, leaving the studio. But we have many moments of that all the time in life, where we just shut down and we maybe just don't ask for the raise or stand up for what we really want. Or even I notice sometimes I don't like the way someone talks to me, right, in my family, and I just let it go. I don't say something about it in the moment. And I just think these feelings of shame or not feeling worthy enough are so universal. And I think the more you talk about something, the less taboo it gets, right? Because I think so often we're like, well, I'm the only one who has these thoughts. I'm the only one who has these feelings. I'm the only one who feels self-conscious when I ask someone to move to make space for me. And it's just like the more we can podcast and broadcast the fact that no, I mean, this is a universal emotion. And I think what you're sharing about avoidance, it reminds me so much of fear. It's like on the other side of fear, on the other side of discomfort, a breakthrough is waiting for you. So before we let you go, I think I just want to ask about the discomfort factor, right? Because when we change the lens and we see, okay, what we're avoiding or what I'm avoiding is a flashlight, like it's like a glow stick. I think of those people at the airport with the sticks who are guiding the planes, right? What I'm avoiding is that guiding light, that stick saying, hey, over here, there's like an awesome runway for you, right? To take off, to do something really interesting. But people get paralyzed with fear, right? And we get stuck. So what advice do you have for folks, or what did you find helpful in terms of how do you actually take something you're afraid of or take something you're avoiding and start taking those baby steps towards conquering it, towards getting to the breakthrough on the other side?
That's a great question. So as a teacher of avoidance, I have a writing course and a whole like writing system called Unavoidable Writing. And the idea with that course specifically, but also what I teach, this is like a life philosophy, right? It's not like a product that I'm selling. It's about how to understand and process your avoidance in a way that actually honors you. And I don't know about you, Brad, but I love what you were saying about dealing with fear and feelings of like uncertainty, all the things that are such natural human emotions and experiences. And what I was starting to say is, I don't know about you, but sometimes for me, the conversation around fear and doing what you're afraid of feels a little bit like overly strong-armed, like sometimes even overly masculinized, like in an unhealthy way, about like whatever you're afraid of, like do it, jump, like fight through it and like conquer it. It's very like there's a lot of bravado and like machismo about it. And I often find that when we're talking about avoidance, that there's certain things that everybody can be afraid of or uncomfortable with that they don't have to do. And the way that I try to encourage writers and yogis to process their avoidance is to go through this quick 4-point Q&A with themselves. So I'd love to walk you through that. It'll take me just about 1 second
Do
because
it.
there's 4 conditions. Yeah, there's 4 key conditions. So it's really easy. So think about 2019. There's something that you want to do, some way you want to feel, and rather than setting like a New Year's resolution, you want to just like face what you're avoiding. Just face it. It doesn't have to be like conquering it. It doesn't have to be defeating it. Just facing it, embracing it, learning from it. So here's what you do. The first element of avoidance is that you're choosing it. So what I mean is, if you're in a workplace scenario that's really uncomfortable with a fellow coworker and you don't want to see that person ever, but you can't literally escape dealing with that person because it's at work, that's not really you avoiding in the sense that we're talking about like personal learning and growth. There's probably a lot to learn there, but also you don't deserve to deal with a jerk at work, right? Like you're stuck there. So you're not choosing that experience. If it's something that's like a backwards choice, like me going to yoga, but then deciding to leave, there's some element of choice there, right? Like I want it at my core, but there's some resistance. So sometimes avoidance can feel like a backwards choice. Think about someone who's like really wants to write a book, but they get to like the first page and they're like, I can't start. So there's choice involved, but there's like some sort of disconnect happening. Part 2 of learning from what you're avoiding is just acknowledging the fact that you are literally aware of the fact that the avoidance exists. So if I am not a practicing vegan and I've never heard of veganism before, and then it's not like I'm avoiding giving up meat because I don't know that dietary lifestyle exists. So literally just like the fact that you're choosing something, even in a backwards way, and it's not a matter of ignorance. Like it's not something you've never learned before. You can only avoid something that you're choosing and something that you're aware of. Finally, we're talking about avoidance in a way that it's actively happening within you or in your experience, so much so that it actually makes you feel like you're being held back. Now, what that means is that your avoidance has to be occurring on some level that's so active or present that you kind of like constantly feel it near. It's not something that you can, so let's say that you go do a polar plunge on New Year's Day, like everybody gathers by the water, you jump in, it's cold, it's terrible, but you do it to raise money for charity. So that's a once in a year experience that you have. It's not something that's happening ongoing. So on that day of the polar plunge, you may be like, I really don't want to do this. I'm avoiding it. But you fight through it and you do it anyway. Conversely, say you have an estranged sibling and you constantly feel like you should be trying to reach out and engage with them. It's that ongoing feeling like that you want it, that it's active within you. You can feel it more days than not, that you can be certain that there's something to be learned. There's something to be learned from confronting that avoidance. And of course, the final piece being, as I mentioned, feeling like you're being held back, like there's some positive growth that could await you from the experience of confronting this avoidance if you can just get through the discomfort. And sometimes the discomfort isn't just fear. Sometimes it can be guilt. It can be guilt that is imposed upon you because of your gender and gender expectations and gender, like the expectations of gender roles. It can be because you grew up in a certain religious or cultural heritage that makes you feel like you shouldn't want things, or you shouldn't feel indulgent or decadent or full of desire. Sometimes it can be a deeply rooted sense of shame, like that I experienced, or it can be from being shamed in some sort of a social environment or in your upbringing. Like there's a lot there, and I don't mean to take this into like psychology territory, but the fact is, Brett, just to connect it to what you were saying, like these are all such natural human emotions and experiences, and on some level we all are dealing with feelings of fear, guilt, shame, grief. We're all bound to experience them. They're such natural human emotions. They all correlate as well to the chakras, as the shadow, like the pitfall or the shadow tendency to the empowered first, second, third, and fourth chakras. So as a matter of ascending the chakras and moving more in towards a state of yoga and ultimately to pursue enlightenment, go all the way for it, that learning from these experiences on the human level can be really powerful, and they can really show you the way forward in your new year and clearly beyond.
And the 4 points to avoidance, because I just want to make sure that we get them. The first one was choosing, right? So we see where we're making the choice. The second is we're aware of the fact that we're avoiding it, right?
Yes. Yep.
And
The
then
third is that it's ongoing, but there's an element of like it's happening presently. And the fourth is I usually say regression. It's like this feeling like you're being held back or actually kind of like drifting in reverse because the avoidance is preventing you from the growth, the watershed moment, the awareness, like the next, your natural next level, just like stepping more into your true self.
so if something ticks these 4 boxes, then we know it's something we truly are avoiding and need to start.
And ought to consider what it would be like to give yourself to that. Yeah, and that's like, I mean, it's a lot easier said than done. It's easy to kind of pick apart these conditions and say like, okay, well, there's this, and now what? Like, what do I do now? Well, I mean, that's the journey. That's the yogic journey, right? And it could be a lifelong process. But I think when you whittle down the overwhelming number of choices before you and start to focus on what you're avoiding, you'll find really rewarding growth and community and connections and opportunities to
Yeah.
connect with others. Like as a teacher, if you're dealing with this, you can bet your students are, and you can parlay that learning experience into something that's teachable and something that really guides them, not on just a theoretical level, but on a really felt level.
Community is huge. And then, I mean, this is such ridiculous advice because it's so simple, but it's really worked for me. And it's just like baby steps, right? I always just tell my students, I'm like, what if they have, a fear of teaching or, teaching yoga, right? Obviously, because I train a lot of yoga teachers. So that comes up a lot. The fear of teaching. It's like, well, can you teach your mom? Can you teach your, if they can't teach their, like a family member, it's like, what about a pet, right? Like just take like the smallest possible step you can in the direction of your fear. And all of a sudden it's just like, I visualize it. It's like, when the water's freezing and you got to dip your toe in and then some people can just jump in, right? But a lot of us can't. And I was appreciating what you were saying too about how that's really like a young masculine approach to like face your fear now, right? Like, and it was interesting because when I got a lot of coaching years ago, when I was starting my, yoga business and journey, like I had so many coaches because I worked a full-time corporate job forever, building my business on the side. And every coach I worked with would just be like, quit your job, you're strong enough. You can do it. And, they were right. I'm sure I would have completely landed on my feet. And I probably took a lot more time than I needed to. But like for certain things in life, we all have different comfort levels with different aspects of our life, And for me, like money and finances, like huge trigger in my family legacy, right? Like, and I needed to make that transition insanely slowly. It was like my ankles are in the water, my knees are in the water, my thighs are in the water, but my bikini bottoms are still out of the water. You know what I mean? Like it had to be like that. And I just want to tell people like that's okay. Just because it's a longer, slower process, that is better than just doing nothing and then like, oh, it's 2020 and like the same resolution is on your list and zero progress has been made. So just baby steps is like a huge way to start facing what you're avoiding, facing some of these fears. And I'm so excited that we got to connect with you. Dave, tell the listeners where they can find you if they want to check out some of your books. I'll of course put all the links below, but tell them so they can stay in touch.
Thank you, Brett. Yeah, I totally agree with what you were just saying too. I mean, one of my favorite quotes is the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one single step, right? So it's an affirmation, remembering that every little moment and every little experience and every little step you make is a microcosm of a much larger whole, right? So anyway, before we start waxing philosophical about that, where you can find me is my online home is daveursillo.com. My last name is ursillo.com. And if you want to find more about getting some help at the intersection of self-expression and self-knowledge, I have everything from some free little programs to a full-blown e-course at unavoidableWriting.com. And my whole philosophy is very yogic. It definitely bends towards the divine feminine and the divine creative, because as you can hear from our conversation, I'm not much for the over-masculinized expectations in our society and our culture. And so trying to usher some more of the divine feminine into the creative and into our world. So you can find me over there as well. And I'm also on Instagram. If you want to hang out and play, I love sharing pictures. At Dave Ursillo is my Instagram handle.
Savannah family, let me know what you thought of this episode. I would love to hear from you in the form of a rating or review here on iTunes. So a really great New Year's resolution, if you've been meaning to review the show, but you haven't gotten around to it, take a minute to do that now in the new year. It really makes such a difference to leave a rating or review here on iTunes. And I know it's not the easiest thing to figure out how to do, but if you expand the show notes, we have detailed instructions with pictures on how to do it. So please leave a review, show your support. It really makes a difference difference, getting the show in front of more people who want to transform their lives through yoga and meditation. And I also just want to thank Savannah Spirit. If you haven't yet checked out Savannah Spirit, their gorgeous online shop full of fair trade yoga jewelry, gifts, crystals, clothing. They are such an incredible company, and you can use that coupon code TAKE25, still valid now in 2019, TAKE25 for $25 off anything in your shopping cart if you're a new customer at savannahspirit.com. Thank you so much for being here, for listening. I can't wait to connect with you in a future episode. From my heart to yours, namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.